over to Andrew and Alby.
Thanks, Karen, and thank you everyone for joining us in the final webinar in this series. But as we were discussing before we started officially, we continue to learn, and so we'll do more of these in the future. So today's a bit of a recap on what we've covered, and also a chance to answer a couple of questions and cover off on a couple of things that we couldn't do with the simulator. So hopefully this will explain a couple of those things for people who asked about them. We had a lot of questions after the mainsail trim webinar, so I hope this helps answer some of those questions. Okay, so it's a bit of a real overview. So the first point is just preparation for the season, and season means whenever we go sailing again. So it's real basic stuff, but it's all pretty standard. So make sure the underwater surfaces of your boat are clean. If you're getting the boat anti-fouled, make sure they do a nice job. If you can, sand off some of the old anti-foul and get a bit of weight out and make it a bit smoother, that's even better. And get a diver to give your boat a scrub every now and then. Just get all the slime off it, and that will, that's it. The handicapper doesn't penalise you for doing that. Remove any unnecessary items not needed for racing. We all have, I'm sure most of us, if you went down to your boat when you can, if you pulled everything out, you'd find you've got 7 half-empty tubes of sunscreen, 5 right-hand gloves, 7 left-hand gloves, 38 hats, a broken pair of sunglasses. All that stuff's great, but it doesn't do you any good. So take all the stuff off you don't need. And if you use your boat for a mix of racing and cruising, just take off the stuff that you're not going to need till the squadron cruise or Easter or Christmas time, because it doesn't help you get around the course any quicker. Tune your rig. Make sure the mast is in the middle of the boat and the same from side to side. You don't need a rigger or a sailmaker to do this for you, but it's pretty simple. Take a halyard, take your main halyard, put a certain amount of weight on it, take it down and put it next to the chain plate on the port side. Make sure you use a constant amount of tension with the same hand. And what you do is you pull it down until it just touches the deck with that amount of load on it. Cross over, do the same on the other side. If on the port side the halyard's 25 mil or an inch off the deck, then your mast isn't in the middle of the boat. So get that in the middle, and then try and side up the back of the mast and make sure the section is straight from side to side. That's a pretty good starting point for every boat. If you race a one design, refer to your tuning guide. Every one design boat pretty well in the world has a tuning guide. If you don't, make one with your sailmaker or rigger. Take the time, set your rig up, and then it doesn't have to be as complicated as a J70 where they're adjusting everything, or a FAR 40. It might just be that you adjust your forestay for different conditions. Service all of your hardware, your winches, your blocks, rope clutches, cleats, running rig. Again, it doesn't cost you anything. It's just a bit of you and your cruise time. And calibrate anything that you can to reproduce fast settings. So moving on to calibration. Calibration marks are invaluable on any boat. They allow us to record what's fast and what's slow. They also allow us to reproduce those fast settings in the future. So have a notepad on board to make notes of those settings. One of the questions that we had in the main trim webinar was, what was my sequence to set up the main at the leeward mark before I went around the mark? And I said that we set the outhaul and the Cunningham and the backstay, the Traveller. And when I'm doing that, I use my calibration marks. They're the reference point for me for that particular day, and they will vary for different conditions. I'm going to have a different backstay setting in 6 knots than I will in 12 knots. But having those calibration marks are my easy go-to reference. But most importantly, calibration marks allow the trimmers to get the setup the same after every tack. I've been on plenty of boats where you're sailing along, everything just doesn't feel right, and you either go down and look at the jib or you ask the trimmer to go and look at the jib, and the jib is 1.5 inches off its normal setting. You wind the jib on and the boat takes off again. So this allows you to set up the same after every tack and get consistency. And one thing that's really important to remember, your jib setup and main setup may not be the same on port tack as it is on starboard. Depends on the wind, the sea state. So, you know, you might be deeper on the foot on port tack because you're punching into the chop or the swell going through the heads, and on starboard you're more car aft and flatter. So the calibration marks just allow us to reproduce those settings, and also, you know, make notes when we're quick. If you know, make a good note of when you've had a good day. You know, jot them down in your notepad, and so you know next time you're in 16 knots, you want this set up. So in the photos, all of these photos are from a FAR 40, and you can see on the left-hand photo there's a really nice calibration grid that's been marked into the deck, nice and clear, and you've got, you know, 6, 6.5, 7, 7.5, and then those yellow marks that we can see. I'm just going to get my pointer going here. So these yellow marks, they're actually whipped and sewn into the halyard. A texture mark is okay, but it does fade and it can bleach it, and it can leach a little bit. If you look here, this black one here, it's twice as big as the yellow one and it's quite faded. So when you've got a good handle, if you actually put a bright coloured or a contrasting whipping twine bit of thread onto the halyard, again, it's very easy for the pit person to see those marks when they're trying to set the halyard up in a hurry. This next shot shows us some calibration marks for our headsail setup. So on the left, we've got the same sort of grid for the in-hauler. Now, on some boats, they mark these as actual degrees from the centerline. It doesn't really matter how you do it. Now, on this boat, you know, 1 is off, and you know, 7 to 8 would be their maximum on. So again, it's just very easy for the trimmer to sight that and see where this ring is sitting on the grid. We've got the same setup for our jib cars. So nice big numbers, easy to see. And again, these notes would go into your notepad so that you know when you've got the medium heavy jib on in 16 knots of breeze, we are 6 on the car, fore and aft, and we might be at 5.5 or 6 on our in-hauler. You make a note of it, it's all there. And obviously, as your sails change shape, these settings will change, as will your halyard tensions. So this is just another shot of the same setup from a different angle. Nice and clear, easy to see. This is a really good headsail trimmer's tool, but only if you have either T-rings in the clews of your jibs, or without having to change all of your sails, if you get your rigger to put an ice splice in your jib sheets and you put a soft shackle as the connector for the jib sheet onto the clew. If you do that, you'll be able to maintain the same setting all the time. And then if you can set your jib up that way, your jib sheet will come through the car here, up onto the winch, and same as your halyard, you'll put a contrasting mark on the sheet and say our optimum position for the jib for the day in those conditions is 3. When you come out of attack, the jib trimmer can actually, once you've accelerated and going to full trim, the trimmer can wind it on until the yellow mark or contrasting mark is sitting directly on top of 3, cleat the jib off, take the winch handle out and hit the rope. And it just means you don't have to wind the jib on, look up, have a look at your bands, wind a bit more jib on or ease a bit off. It's a really fast, easy setup to reproduce quickly, because on most boats, unless it's very light winds, they always go better with people up on the side. So this is a really good tool, but it won't work if you bowline your sheets on, because that mark will keep changing. And if you have to if you change the jib or you drop the jib and take the sheets off to change them over the pole, you'll lose your mark. So if you're serious about racing, it's something worthwhile looking at doing. It's not a lot of money to get a couple of ice splicers in your jib sheets. That said, we've all got a bit more time at the moment. Get online, learn how to splice, put your own ice splice in your jib sheets if you want. And I apologise to all the riggers who are watching for saying that, but not everyone, has the means to pay for a rigger to do that job for them. This is a really critical setup for any boat with non-overlapping jibs. And it's also quite good on a boat with Genoas who has a number 3 Genoa because it sheets in front of the spreaders. So these marks here, these are our reference marks for where the leech of the jib will be when we're at trim. And you'll notice there's more marks here in the middle on the bottom spreader, because the bottom spreader, we get a lot more range of where the leech hits the bottom spreader, because where we put the in-hauler has quite a big impact on where we are here. So, some boats will only have 3, some boats will have 5, but it doesn't really matter how you do it. It's just as long as you have some markings, it will enable you to reproduce those settings. This is not really a calibration thing, but this is the mainsail trimmer's console on a FAR 40. And what they've done, they've marked tack, outhaul Cunningham. And this is good because in the heat of battle, when you're in a hurry, you're trying to get something pulled on, or you get a new trimmer, they don't have to adjust something and see what changes. It's a really quick reference. You can do it with a texter. You don't have to go to the trouble of having labels made. But anything you can mark is a good tool to have. We have calibrations here for the traveller. Again, we might be going upwind in 8 knots of breeze, and we want to have the traveller to windward, and we might be on the number 5 mark. It just means coming out of the tack, the trimmer can haul on the traveller line, get it up to windward quickly to put helm on the boat and give the helmsperson some load in the tiller and on the rudder. So you know that tack to tack, you're up to 5. And again, it's in your notebook. For different conditions, you'll have a different traveller setting. These last couple on the left, this is just a calibration mark for your backstay. If you've got a block and tackle, you can use texter marks. You can put a batten there, but it's a bit harder to use when you don't have a hydraulic backstay. But the key to this one is you've got these easy to reproduce numbers. And I've actually been on a couple of boats where they had the batten, but they didn't have any numbers or marks. So it's just a stick. This is a calibration stick. So it doesn't matter what the spacing of the numbers is or how many numbers you have. It's good to have the full stroke and range of the backstay, but it's really nice just to have that easy to go to calibration. This is one that some of you may or may not have seen before, the photo on the right. This is on the boom fang. And the reason they do this is twofold. One, the different colours represent different settings for your downwind twist to make sure the leech of the mainsail is setting properly and you've got the right flow. But just as importantly, it's a preset mark for when you go around the top mark. When you go around the top mark, if you have no vang on, the boom will shoot up into the air and you'll have no power. But worse is when it's a bit windy, if you get to the top mark and the mainsail trimmer lets the main off, but the vang's on hard, you'll probably broach because you can't unload the leech of the main enough. So on a lot of race boats, they have these marks, and in 25 knots, you might find that the mark is the white one. And you need this block here to be at the white mark, otherwise you won't be able to get the boat to bear away around the mark. As it gets lighter, it's not so critical. But a more common setup might be in 15 knots, we have to go to the blue mark to get around the top mark and be able to bear away without using too much rudder. But our downwind setting is the yellow mark. So you'll ease to the blue mark before the mark. The trimmer or the pit person will do that. You bear away, get your feet, get yourself settled. And then once the pit person's got themselves tidied up, you pull it back onto the yellow mark. So again, it's just another calibration tool. Everything you can calibrate and quantify just makes it easier to get the boat around the course faster. And most of this stuff doesn't cost you anything, just a bit of your time and probably a couple of metres of electrical tape. Okay, we've talked about traveller position. We had a lot of questions about that. And so we're just going to go back to this because traveller we covered a bit with the mainsail, but we couldn't really correlate the traveller and the headsail together as nicely as I would have liked. We could cover it on a Genoa, but not on a short-footed, non-overlapping jib. So the things to keep in mind with your traveller is generally you want to keep the traveller position as high as you can for the conditions. So in light winds, we'll have the traveller to windward of the centre line. And we want to keep the traveller position high and twist the sails to match each other. And there'll be a photo a little bit later that shows that. You want to review, excuse me, let's have a little bit of water. I'm not doing a Josh Frydenberg. You want to review the two leech profiles. There's no point having the leech of the mainsail hanging out or over twisted and the leech of the jib over trimmed. You're out of kilter, out of whack. And what I like to do is I'll often be in the pre-race setup. Once I've got my trim right, I'll walk to the back of the boat, stand behind the boom and side up the leech of the main and the leech of the jib. I'll look up and make sure the two leeches have got a similar twist profile. So it's just something you need to eyeball, but it takes 30 seconds. There's, if I'm trimming the jib, there's no point me having the jib boned on hard and hitting all of my tight trim marks if the mainsail trimmer's got the leech of the main right open and the traveller really high to windward. We want to have, as a reference, we want to have our clues in a similar position relative to each other and our twist profile to be similar to each other. If we end up with the traveller too low, we have to trim the mainsail harder to get the sail to set. And this makes the boat quite heavy on the helm, and a term we often use is gybe. Low traveller, you need to trim harder. With the traveller high, you need more twist to get the flow over the sails. Remember our leech ribbons and our leech ribbons on the jib. We can't have the traveller up and the sail sheeted on hard. You can have the traveller low and the sail sheeted hard, but it makes the boat quite heavy to steer. And if it's heavy to steer, you're using too much rudder. So by keeping the traveller up, we can ease the main sheet and twist the main, but the lower leech of the mainsail is still setting, and that's what gives us our height. It doesn't matter if the head of the main is washed out and quite flat or just slightly inverted. We need that lower leech to be doing all the hard work. So I'm going to share this with you. This was a couple of photos that were sent to me from a client in Melbourne. And he rang me on the Monday and he said, oh, we were struggling a bit on the weekend. Yeah, the boat just wasn't going as well as it normally does. I said, okay, well, because was the helm really heavy? And he went, yeah, it was. And I said, oh. I said, where did you have the main traveller? He said, we had the main traveller all the way down. I said, and where did you have the in-haul? And he said, oh, we had it about halfway on. I went, oh, okay. Yep, that all makes sense. And what happened was because he had his traveller so low and the jib in, every time he got heavy on the helm and started to round up, they'd ease the main had flat. And then when he pulled the main back on to set it, he had too much helm. If he'd had the traveller further to windward, he could have still had that nice twist profile in the mainsail and taken the helm off the boat, and the two leeches would have been more parallel. And look, just for those of you who have been watching the series, a couple of little other things to take from the photos. If you look here, it's quite windy down there. His outhaul is not tight. You can see how much depth there is on the foot of the main. There's a gap. You can see there's the gap between the foot and the boom. So the outhaul could be tighter. His backstay is not all the way on. So if you had more backstay on, that would bend the rig more, flatten the mainsail, open the head, give him more twist, T-power. It would straighten the forestay a little bit more. Even though the head stays nice and straight, it would help. So he didn't do himself any favours with his setup, and that's the end result. So that's why we want to try and keep those leeches twisting in parallel with each other. Now, the in-hauler is something that we couldn't really cover in the simulator, so I thought we'd just spend a little bit of time on that today. So the in-hauler allows the trimmers to keep the main and the jib clue in a similar relative position, as I said in the previous setup thing. The in-hauler can be used in most conditions, and I would say generally most people don't use enough in-hauler. So the best thing to do is bring your in-hauler in, and if you're slow, particularly if the wind is light, ease it a bit, because you may have just gone too far. You might have got a bit greedy. So bring it in, and often bring it in more than you would. I was sailing on a Mum 30 a couple of years ago, and I said, you set the jib up like you normally do, and which they did, and we were sailing in about 6 or 7 knots. They had no in-hauler on at all. I pulled the in-hauler nearly all the way on, and we retrimmed, and they said, wow, we've never done that before. And I said, well, how's it feeling? And he said, it feels great. And the boat was fast. There is a bit of a misconception that you don't want any in-hauler on when the wind is light. You've got to be careful. If you go too far, as with anything in trim, you can slow the boat down. So the old rule, if in doubt, let it out. Push the boundaries, trim it as hard as you think you can. If it's not working, don't be scared to ease it outboard a little bit. As the breeze increases, flatten your sails and twist more before you ease the in-hauler. So if you flatten the foot of the mainsail, take some outhaul on, pull a bit more backstay on, drop a little bit of car back on the jib if you need to. This will all allow you to keep the clues parallel or in the same relative position, but get a bit more twist. Because remember, don't forget, we are only using the lower edge of the mainsail most of the time, as the wind gets up. So don't just dump the clue out on the in-hauler as soon as you get a little bit overpowered. Try and maintain that twist profile and twist the sails more as the breeze increases. So this is a nice shot of a far 40 going upwind. They've got the whole crew on the rail, and even though they've got nice heel on, if you look here, the two clues are in a reasonably relative position to the centre line of the yacht. And then as we go up, if we look at the twist profile, they're pretty well parallel. That looks really nice. The boat's in control. And here's another one that we discussed quite a bit. The tiller is centred, so they're not using too much helm. This is an example of what happens when you don't use the in-hauler in light winds, because that's what everyone's told you. You shouldn't be using the in-hauler. And I just want to concentrate on a couple of things, then we're going to look at some closer shots. It's very, very light breeze. You can see there's one person to windward, everyone else is to leeward. If we look at our mainsail, it's actually quite flat on the foot, so they could use easily a bit of outhaul. That would power the boat up a bit more. And the leech is probably a little on the flat and firm side for such light breeze. But the big thing is, if we look here, our clue is out here. Our mid leech is actually on the lower mark on the spreader. But look at the top leech on the top spreader, and you can see how close it is. So this sail is just, by virtue of the fact that we are outboard on the clue, we have to trim the sail harder to get into this mark at the bottom spreader, which closes the head up. And this was the first sail better, sail faster weekend we did when Michael Coxon and I went out. And this was not the only boat we saw this set up on. There were quite a lot of boats that were exactly the same. So let's focus on what we can see in more detail. You can see here that they are on that outer mark. So that's probably not bad, but you can just see how wide the clue is. And then as we start going up, if we look, instead of on the far 40, the clue was here and the leech was going up like that. And then as we got up to here, it was out here. On this boat, We start wide, we get to our mark, and we close up and get narrower. So it's just a setup thing. A little bit more in-hauler what would have happened is, if the in-hauler here was brought to, say, there, the leach of the sail at this point would end up in here. So to get the leach from here to here, we ease the sheet. And as we ease the sheet, the upper leach here goes from here out to here. So it's just that relationship between the in-hauler and our twist profile. So I'm just going to drink of water, and Alby, maybe have we had any questions at this point?
No questions yet. So feel free to type your questions in, everybody.
All right. Now, Alby just said take a breath in between slides, so if there's a question, I'll get a chance. So, okay, so moving on to twist and in-haulers. This is a nice photo of a far 40 setup. There's a bit of breeze on this day, but we can see here our traveller is central, which is not bad in that much wind, because you can't carry the traveller too high. You're just going to heel over too much. We've got the jib in-hauled quite nicely, and the car is in a pretty powerful position. This is the same photo from, or pretty much the same photo from a bit further aft. And if we look up, all this lower leach is working nicely. And then if we look here, you can see there's a nice amount of twist in the leach. Okay, this is the same day, same fleet, pretty much same patch of water. Now this boat, they've got their traveller a little lower. And the two things I want to highlight here is they've got a fair bit of heel on. So obviously they're a bit pressed. So the mainsail trimmer has got his traveller in his hand here, the trusty traveller. And he's in the process of uncleating it. You can see there's a bit of slack here. In the next photo, he's eased it. His arm's gone straight, the traveller's dropped. So he's trying to take the heel off the boat and the load off the boat with the traveller. The heel is the same or worse. You don't know, because there could have been a wave here. But by dropping the traveller, he hasn't actually helped, the twist profile. The main is still on pretty hard. And if I trust my eyes here, I would say that the main sheet's in the self-tailer and cleaved it off, and he's just doing it all with traveller. So let's have a look at how this compares with other options. But before we do that, we're going to look at his general setup. So we see here we've got no in-hauler on. We've got the car a long way back, and the foot of the jib is really flat. Look at our mainsail. This is good. They've got the outhaul tight. Looks like the luff round is just about girting out and getting to maximum mast bend. Traveller low, sheet's quite hard. So it's hard to tell. We can't see what the upper leach is doing. But let's see what it really looks like in the real world. These two boats are the same class, same day, maybe 5 boat lengths apart. These guys have got the in-hauler on. They've got the traveller in the middle. They've got the boom up. Their lower leach is working. The head of the mainsail would be fully washed out. These guys have gone the other approach. They've no in-hauler on, foot really flat, sails sheeted really hard. And the interesting thing is there's not much helm on this boat, because everything is so wide. They're not getting the height, they're just heeling over a lot. And the more you ease the traveller, the less load you get on the helm. It'd be different if the tiller was pulled all the way up here to windward, and and the helmsperson was struggling to keep the boat going straight. They were rounding up. But what's happening as they ease the traveller, they actually take load off the helm. The jib loads up more, and the bow comes down, and they just keep heeling. I mean, this is a tough day. It's a westerly off Newcastle, and we all know what a westerly's like. The breeze really shifts. It's puffy. There's a massive difference in the angles these two boats are sailing, but I would be happy to say that half of that angle difference could be just different wind on the water in a westerly. But it highlights how two boats can be completely different setup with a very different outcome. Okay, Any questions, Al, before we roll into question time?
No, sorry, no questions.
Okay, no worries. Silence of the lambs.
We've got some questions though, don't we? Which people have
Yeah,
sent
yes.
in.
So what we did do is Karen asked, after we referred it to her, we thought we've got to, we want to do a wrap up. People must have some questions from the previous weeks or just general questions. And so we received a bunch of questions and I've done my best to answer them. And so let's get on to our questions. One question was Genoa and gybe sheeting angles for different conditions. Well, we covered a lot of this with in-haulers, but what if you don't have in-haulers? And a lot of boats don't have them. So you've just got a 4.5 track, and that's fine. That's a lot of boats. That's all you need. If your boat's not set up with in-haulers, it's not the end of the world. In some respects, it makes life easier. There's less variables, and it's easy to reproduce those settings.
Less arguments.
Exactly. Where's the clue at? It's at 4 degrees. No, it should be at 4.5 degrees. Well, where's the car? Well, it's right down. Well, it should be half an inch up. So no, this is really, it's a much easier setup. With in-haulers, when you get it right, you can be really, really fast. But if you get it wrong, you'll be really slow. So going back to our basics, there are 3 sources of power: depth, twist, and angle of attack. To power up, we want more depth and less twist. So we take our Genoa or gybe car forward. To depower, we want to go car aft, and this will flatten the foot and instantly twist the sail more. So don't forget, when we're trying to reduce our power, we want twist and we want to flatten our sails. Once we have enough power, too much depth is just drag. We only want enough power to be able to sail the boat at a nice angle. Excess depth is just more drag. This was a good question. Backstay, runner, and checkstay. We covered the backstay pretty well in the first 2 sessions. As we discussed, the backstay bends the mast and tightens the forestay on a boat with only a backstay. What are these other stays and what do they do? Well, that depends on what type of rig you have. So here's a blast from the past. One of Australia's greatest yachts, Hitchhiker. Masthead rig with runners, backstay runners and checkstays. This is a French 1-tonner, and I had to do a bit of homework to find these, but the internet's great. There's all sorts of information there. It's not just for funny videos of cats and dogs. So on our masthead rig, the backstay does exactly as we explained in the first 2 sessions. It's the aft stay from the masthead to the stern. The runner is the middle stay here, about 1/3 of the way down and at the top spreader. The checkstay is the last stay between the second and the third spreaders. So boats with this setup are generally what we call an inline spreader rig, which means the spreaders are on the same line as the chain plates. A lot of the boats, or most of the boats now, have what we call a swept back spreader rig, where the mast is at one point and the chain plates are behind that point. And that sweep in the spreader supports the mast and stops it from falling over the side. But it also locks the mast in and it doesn't bend as much. So it's a much safer rig, but we don't have anywhere near as much control over sail shape as we do with these older style rigs. So when we tension the backstay, the mast may bend too much for the mainsail luff curve because we don't have the spreaders are basically supporting the mast from side to side. They're not doing anything fore and aft. They're just there to support the mast in side bend. So if we pump the backstay up really hard, we shot the mast forward, we bend it, and we might exceed the luff round and make the mainsail too flat. So we use the runner and the checkstay, we tension them on and they pull the mast back and they control the depth in different sections of the mast. This rig gives the trimmers fantastic control over the main and the headsail. And a lot of the rating rules penalise these because they give you a performance advantage because you've got a lot of control. the next next one, I'm sure most of you have seen boats with this setup out there, is the fractional rig. I call it fractional because the forestay doesn't go all the way to the masthead. It goes a fraction of the way up. So the backstay has a different impact on sail shape than how we explained it in the first two sessions. Because when we pull the backstay on here, it's not doing anything to the forestay. So the backstay is the aft stay, and it runs to the stern as normal. The runner is the middle stay from the hounds or the forestay intersection. So for the people who are a little bit less experienced, we call this the hounds. It's where the forestay intersects the mast. And the checkstay is the lower stay between the second and bottom spreaders. Boats with this setup still have an inline spreader rig, so the impact on the mast bend is far greater. So this is where the two rigs differ, and also a conventional spreader rig differ. The backstay bends the top of the mast. So what happens is the mast is locked in place here where the forestay intersects it. So when we pull this backstay on, right, it comes down and aft, we're basically just bending this part of the mast. It does have a slight impact on the rest, but it's minute. The runner, when we pull that on, it bends the mast from the hounds down because it's putting the mast in compression. It's pulling it aft slightly, but it's mainly pulling it down and trying to compress it together, make these 2 points closer together. And so what happens is as we bring the runner on, forestay tension increases, the mast compresses under load and bends forward. The checkstay is here to control that bend. So as the mast shoots forward, we tension the checkstay, that pulls the mast back and helps us control our sail depth. So again, we had fantastic control over sail shape. The problem with this is we've got fantastic control, but it's harder to keep the mast in the boat because you've probably all done a gybe in 25 knots of breeze and the booms come flying over and it's all a bit messy. Well, back in the good old days, if you didn't pull this runner on, there was nothing holding the mast up except a tiny topmast backstay. And if you had a spinnaker up, all that load would go onto the backstay, and often you would either break the mast here. At that point, when the mast shot forward, it would then break here, at the deck or collapse. So they were great rigs, fun to sail, but a lot harder than the boats we sail nowadays. Okay, this is another question from Terry. You spoke about the jib backwinding the main. So we covered this in the earlier sessions, but let's run over it again. So there's a gap between the leach of the jib or the Genoa and the mainsail, and we call that the slot. And that's the slot where the air flows between those two sails. When we close the slot too much for the conditions, the wind, instead of exiting and going straight aft, it actually blows back into the mainsail and it backwinds the main and makes it flap or lose control. And this goes back to our thing all the time. We're always talking about twist and twist profiles matching. That's why we need both sails to have similar twist profiles. If we've got the jib on too hard or the car is too far forward or we've got too much in-hauler, we're blowing that wind back into the mainsail. Whereas if we have the two twist profiles the same, we're not, because the air is exiting at the same angle as the mainsail. If your main's backwinding, ease the car aft. If you have an adjustable car where the car goes up and down, let it go up, because that's the same as moving the car aft. This will allow the sail to twist, depower, and you won't upset the mainsail. If that doesn't work, you may have, and you have an in-hauler, then you need to go outboard, because clearly going up and aft isn't helping. So go outboard. If you're fully out and you're just on the track, or if you don't have in-haulers and you are just sheeting fore and aft, if it gets really extreme, ease the sheet. It's all you can do. You can't do anything else. You've got to depower. And as we say, we twist to depower. So easing the sheet gives us more twist.
Hey, Huffy, just got one question. What about trimming a jib with a self-tacker, especially in big breeze? How much do you ease and for how long? It's from Owen. Okay,
self-tackers, they make life really easy, but they're not great for performance. But if you have one, we have to work out the best way to improve your performance. So you've got really limited options with the self-tacker. As the breeze gets up, most boats will have either an adjustable system, which might be a line that runs back to the cockpit where you can control where the car is as it goes, in and out. Or more often than not, there are some pin stops, like a stopper, on an old-fashioned, jib car. As the wind gets up, move your stoppers outboard so the clue can go outboard more. We don't want to set up a self-tacker the same way we would set up an in-hauler, unless it's very, very light winds. We need to keep the slot open, because often as you ease the jib sheet on a self-tacker, the foot just gets rounder and the leech completely falls open. We still need to keep enough tension to keep the leech set. So move your cars outboard, and then if it gets to the point where you're fully overpowered, then you may have to crack a bit of sheet. And don't forget, it's all about angle of attack, so sail the boat a bit higher. If you're really pressed, take some heel off the boat and depower that way.
Yeah, nice. I think maybe also worth mentioning with the self-tacker being usually quite short on the foot, so the jib's a very, very high aspect.
Yes.
So it's quite easy to actually lose the whole head of the sail if you start moving the sheet lead on the clue board too much.
Yep, good point. Yep, and I think any of us who've sailed with a self-tacker in a twilight race or sailed against a boat with a self-tacker in a twilight race would see it. As soon as you ease the sheet to go reaching, the head of the sail just starts to collapse. So yeah, they're very, very high aspect. And as the aspect ratio changes, that sheet position and sheet lead becomes more critical. Another question we had was for gust response, traveller or main sheet? Well, look, it does vary to a certain degree from boat to boat, and nothing's set in stone. The old school method was to set the twist with the main sheet and play the traveller. But the boats were quite different too. Back in those days, the boats were heavier, they had very high stability, they were narrower. And so they could really carry their sail area quite well. Now boats are beamier, they carry their beam further aft. A lot of boats don't have as much stability as some of the older boats did. So if you've got your sails trimmed really, really hard and you use the traveller, you're not changing the twist. And as I say here, when we use the traveller, we decrease the angle of attack, but the twist is locked in, so the helm still stays heavy. Think back to our photo of the FAR 40 with the traveller down and the jib sheet line really hard. We're not actually helping to keep the boat, nicely balanced. And also, as we ease the traveller, we close the slot, because we haven't changed the jib, but what we've done is we've eased the traveller down. So now the clue of our main and the leech of our main is closer to the leech and clue of our jib. So we're closing the slot. By keeping the traveller set and easing the sheet, we twist the head, which depowers us. If it's a bit puffy, it gives us quite a fast result. If we ease 2 inches of main sheet, the boom goes up, the head opens, and we get quite a quick reaction. And we keep our main and headsail trim twist pretty similar. So, traveller was the way to go. And look, there are still some boats that sail with the traveller, but the bulk of the boats that we sail nowadays, particularly around the harbour, I find the main sheet, works better than the traveller. And here's this is our photo of our FAR 40 again. Everything's on hard, the traveller's low, main sheet's cleated, but it doesn't look. They don't look that settled. Our next question from an old 12-foot skiff friend of mine, Jimmy Walsh, was asymmetrics, inside or outside gybe, and rate of turn. Well, a lot of this depends on the boat and your sprit length and the conditions. Some boats are designed to have a bow sprit and fly an asymmetric only. More often than not nowadays, a lot of you would have an asymmetric, but your boat was never designed for it. And generally we want to have quite a long pole because we're trying to get, you know, the tack of the asymmetric sail further out and give us enough room to be able to get the sail through in the jibes. So with a longer sprit, you jibe inside up to about 12 knots. But this, and it doesn't matter what you're doing, you never want to let the clue go past the forestay because this just makes it's more sheet for you to pull on as you come out the other jibe. So have a mark on the sheet. I find it's best to actually watch the sail and ease the sheet, hit the forestay, and then start whaling on the new sheet as hard and as fast as you can. With a boat with a short sprit or no sprit, and often you'll be flying a Genica maybe off an anchor roller or a fitting on the stem of your boat, you can inside jibe up to about 10 knots. But the problem is you don't have that gap to get the clue of the Genica in between the tack and the forestay. So the cutoff is a little bit lower. And you don't want to do it in too much breeze because there is a transition when you're trying to get the sail through where the whole sail, you know, the clue goes up, the sail goes forward. And if you get it too far forward and too much sail in front of the luff of the Genica, it will actually twist and you might wrap it around itself or the forestay. So 10 knots is probably the cutoff. In light winds, you want to make a smooth turn all the way through the jibe. It's just a nice, you know, you've got to pick the rate of turn for the conditions, but it's a smooth general turn so you're not using the handbrake or the rudder too much. And in light breeze, you want to do it faster because you're trying to rotate the boat through and get the sail across the other side as quickly as you can. If you take too long, the whole sail will just collapse. In more breeze, you want the first part of the turn to be a nice smooth turn. Have a small pause in the middle when you're dead downwind, and this just gives the guys in the cockpit a chance to get the Genica to blow through forward in front of the boat, and then start pulling the new sheet on. It's only a pause. You don't sit there and put the kettle on. It's maybe for 3 seconds, and then as you see, you know, as they start bringing the sheet on, you want to come out of the jibe higher than your normal angle because this helps you accelerate. So when you see that when they've got the bulk of the sheet on, start your turn up, and it shouldn't be a really rapid turn up unless you're sailing on a boat where they can really get the sheet across quickly. It needs to be a slow turn up, and then as you see the Genica set, that's when you really want to come out a bit hotter, and this will help the boat accelerate because you lose quite a lot of speed in a jibe. You know, it's a big turn. The sail collapses completely. Unlike a symmetrical boat where the spinnaker stays set through the jibe, we lose quite a lot. Okay, what tips do you have for people with older sails? Buy new sails. It's what we do. We're sail makers. But you know, in the real world where we all live, yeah, that's not an option. And even the Grand Prix guys don't buy a full set of sails every year. You know, you've got to use what you've got. And what often works well is to have a program where you might buy one sail every year. You might buy one sail every 2 years, but have a plan and then just you know, use that as your starting point. But you know, when you're on the water, you need to use all the trim tricks that we've discussed to help you use what you've got. You've got what you've got. You can't change it. So remember, power comes from angle of attack, depth, and twist. If your sails are too deep, twist them. Now, if you can't make the sail any flatter, twist it. If the draft is too far aft, use more halyard or Cunningham. Drag the draft forward. Use those controls to reshape your sail on the water to make the most of what you have. You know, unless your sails are delaminated, they can be recut. You know, everyone thinks, oh, you can't recut sails. You can. We often recut sails to keep them fast. Arrange to photograph your sails with the sail maker. After scanning the photos, we can give you a quote for your recut and make you faster. So look, I'm just going to keep moving a bit quicker because the time's getting away from us here. Just bear with me. Alby sent me a message. Yep. Okay. So yeah, we can see here, this is a photo of a MC38 code 1 jib that was recut. And what happened is the sail was just getting a little bit straighter in the back end than we would like. So we just recut it and we made the leech a little bit straighter. And that gives gives the sail a new lease of life. And unfortunately, I'm going to apologise, but what we do is we scan the sails, and this is a PDF, so I couldn't put it in the presentation, but we then put it into our program, and we can measure the depth of the sail, and we compare that with the previous photos. When we always photograph the sail before we recut it. You can't just have a slash; you've got to do it properly. But then we can compare the depths, and we can see what we've done to our shape. So yeah, look, that's time got away from us. I'm sorry I waffled on for too long. So look, I had a couple of other questions, and guys, I will address those with you. I'll send you an individual email. So I'm really sorry. Jane, I've got a nice checklist for you, but I can cater a little bit more individually to you. And David, sorry, I had your answer here, but we just ran short on time. So I'll send you an email as well. And yeah, that's a wrap. So thanks, everyone. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Andrew and Alby. I think it's been a really constructive series of chats we've been able to have. Andrew and I have been talking about next stages and the next steps. And, when we can get out on the water, we're talking about having some small groups down on a boat next to the pond, Andrew, to just go through some of the things that we've been talking about, actually see firsthand what's happening when we adjust the backstay, see what effect that has on the rig, and then actually get out on the water and try it out.
Yep, that's the plan. We just have to wait and see what the government says and what our restrictions are. But yeah, let's try and use what we've learned in the classroom and put it to practical use and see what really happens when you pull the backstay on a real boat, not a pretend one. So yeah, Karen will keep everyone posted. The three of us will work together to come up with a plan. And yeah, so on behalf of Alby and myself, thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate the opportunity to share some of our knowledge, and we hope that everyone got a little bit out of it.
No, and thank you again, Andrew and Alby. It's been fantastic to hear what you've had to say, and yes, we've all learnt something. So look forward to seeing you face to face next time. Okay, and thanks everybody for joining us.